Introduction to Cloud Computing, Warnings, and Things to Watch. Let's face it, folks, when you make a decision to use cloud computing resources, it's important to know up front what you're dealing with. In this nugget, we're going to give you a quick overview of what to be on the lookout for when you're utilizing these cloud resources. Security, hidden fees, untrained personnel, they're just a few caveats and gotchas when working in a cloud environment. We're going to take a look at 4 primary things dealing with those caveats, those gotchas, those things to watch out for when you move into a cloud computing environment. The first one, of course, is going to be security. What things need to be in place, what happens in the cloud, and then even what happens at home at your own office. Costs. Hey, it costs money, but guess what? Sometimes you can find yourself caught with hidden costs and fees that you weren't made aware of right up front. People. Remember, you still, despite the fact that you're using maybe advanced technology in the cloud versus at home, you still have to have people that can access it. What kind of training do you have in place? And then finally, disaster recovery. The thing that we always say to everybody is always make sure that you have a plan for what goes wrong. One of the primary things that we are concerned with as IT professionals is security. And when you're dealing with cloud computing, that's no different. I mean, come on. Ever since we started utilizing networks and we had access to the internet and we were getting information back and forth and even transporting. Remember, we created VPNs where we use firewalls to create DMZs and protect ourselves from outside attacks. We have group policies in place to allow people certain access to certain parts of the computers. We have password policy. So security is a big thing. Now what happens, of course, is when we get into the cloud, we also need to be concerned with security. In fact, concerns about the security of cloud computing environments is one of the #1 reasons why the companies and firms are not interested in cloud computing, because they're concerned. They want to make sure that everything is okay. In fact, one survey that I was reading one day said that 49% of enterprises and 51% from small and medium-sized businesses have security as the #1 reason why they're not going to use it. But see, you guys want to use it. So what do we need to be concerned of? Well, there's 2 primary areas here. We have security in the cloud, which is going to be, of course, all the services and stuff that's happening up here. And then you need to be secure at home or in the office with the people that are going to be using it. Because as secure as it is up here on the cloud, if you have bad security policies down here, guess what? That's not going to really matter because something will happen down at the local level rather than in the cloud. So that's important for us to look at in a total big picture. So probably the first thing we need to look at in the cloud is, of course, data protection, or what some people like to call data privacy. This is a concern. So when you go in and you're starting to investigate some of these cloud computing companies, whether you're doing this as a management by cloud or you have some data that's going to be stored up here, one of the things you're going to want to look for is make sure that it cannot be accessed by unauthorized users, and you want to make sure that it can't be somehow lost in the shuffle, and all of a sudden now you even can't have access to that data. Nothing worse than saving some data up here in the cloud, they encrypt it, and then nobody has access to it anymore. Doesn't help anybody. Well, one of the first things that you're going to want to do is make sure that your data, when it's up here in the cloud, so if we've got some servers up here in the cloud, so we'll draw some servers here. Okay, here's some servers up in the cloud. Here's some devices up in the cloud. And let's say that your folks have sent some data and it goes on up here into the cloud. Well, what happens when it gets there? Well, you've got data from company X here, you got data from company Y here, and you have data from company Z over here. Now to us, this is all one big cloud, but in reality, these are separate racks or servers or network application or network access servers and stuff like that. And so what you want to do is make sure that when you talk with your companies that there is protection between these particular server nodes or on a particular hard drive or on a particular segment. So make sure that data from one customer is segregated from that of another. That's a big question to ask. Then the other thing that you're going to want to make sure of is that the application that is utilized to send the data back and forth, it usually resides down here, you want to make sure that you are sending this in encrypted format. So you want to make sure that not only is the data privacy set up between, you want to make sure that you understand what their encryption levels are. encryption levels, as well as the transfer encryption. Takes me a long time to spell this out. Wish I could type it. Okay, so you have your encryption levels at the source, or where you're saving, and you also have, of course, your transfer encryption that occurs between you and the cloud. You want to make sure that you're using a secure socket layer transfer that goes from here to here. You want to make sure that up here that they're using incredibly high-end security encryption on the data itself. And in fact, in certain cases, what you're going to want to do is make sure that they do not have access to the key to unlock the encryption up here. You do a double key where you have the one key, the public key, they have the public key and you have your private key, and you have to use both in order to access up here. So that's probably the first thing, is taking a look at security in the cloud. Look at the data privacy. You also want to make sure that all the critical data that you have up here is also available. What's the availability? Okay. Because even though it might be secure up here and you have this data that's contained up here and you can't get access to it because of, well, we're sorry, we're having some server maintenance right now, well, that doesn't help you too much. So not only does it have to be secure, the availability also needs to be there. So that is basically all the information, when we talk about security, some of the important questions or the caveats we need to look for when we're looking at in the cloud. Now we need to turn our attention to what happens at home or in the office, because this can be just as important as the security up at the cloud level. Now, the first thing that you want to ask yourself is, how do we access? In other words, how do you access the cloud? See, when you are accessing the cloud, one of the advantages of the cloud is, guess what? We'll say that here's Emily. There's James Conrad right there. And here's me. And here's Lisa. So you got all four of us right here. Well, at the office, you usually are behind some sort of network servers and some things like that before you access the cloud. But guess what? When Emily goes home, and James goes home, or Chris, me, goes home, or Lisa goes home, we are also going to want to be able to access information or applications or things in the cloud. So how do you access the cloud? You need to make sure your security policies are in place to make sure that, guess what? Wi-Fi is secure. Make sure your Wi-Fi is secure. Most of us use, wireless, whether it's at the home office or whether it's at the corporate office, and you want to make sure that you're using secure Wi-Fi. You want to be using WPA, WEP. That's old and it can be, hacked fairly simply if someone knows what to do. But WPA is pretty good, especially WPA2. You might use some sort of, network access security where you have to go in and like radius, and so you might have, your Wi-Fi solution has to access the radius server so the password can be complete and then you can get on. You want to make sure that Wi-Fi is secure. The other thing you might want to do is make sure that you have a policy on out of office. That's what OOO, out of office access. So what happens is that you might say that the only way that you can access the data is that when you are out of the office, you need to VPN into your company and then utilize any of the resources that are out there. That is a security policy that will help protect you, and guess what? It also helps protect them, because now all of that money that you've spent on those network security devices is going to be used to their favor. So in the cloud, we want to look at data privacy, encryption levels, the availability, the transfer encryption, and then we want to take a look at home. How do you access the cloud? Is your Wi-Fi secure? And make sure that you have some sort of policies in place on your out-of-office access. The second most important thing, and well, some people might even say the first most important thing, is of course costs. We talked about security, but let's take a look at cost. One of the things that I usually find with people is we're doing this, we're getting into the cloud computing up here because we're trying to save money. But one of the things that a lot of people make as a mistake is that they go ahead and they choose the cheapest solution. Well, just remember what my granddad always used to say. You get what you pay for. You know, the provider that you are going to be utilizing, whether this is for software as a solution, maybe you're using Salesforce or something like that, if it's data storage like Amazon or Rackspace or some of those guys, whether it's website collaboration, all those things, you want to make sure that the provider should have full consulting services from A to Z, soup to nuts, and live support in the case of emergency. So, you know, one of the things that you might want to do is take a look at and say, well, it cost X amount of dollars for one company, but you know, I don't get a lot of service for that. I can pay just a little bit more, or maybe 20% more, and I get outstanding customer service, emergency support people. You know, I pick up the phone 24/7, and I'm talking to a live human being. You get what you pay for. That's the first caveat to look for. The second is hidden costs. Now remember, a cloud storage service provider will probably give you a upfront cost of this is how much it costs per gigabyte or how much per terabyte, right? How much bandwidth is going to be used to access the data. Any other value-added services, things like security, or maybe what they'll do is they'll say we'll actually create a mirror of your information as a double security backup. The problem is you might have a low upfront cost when you're accessing your data, but then you find out that, hey, guess what, if we got some servers up here, let's say we got a couple servers up here, and you say, well, not only do I want to store the data, I want to duplicate it, and the cost per gigabyte of transfer or terabyte of transfer is let's say it's about $15 or something like that. But then you find out that the cost to transfer in between a server, or what they call transference, is going to be oh so much more. You might find out that to move something from one place to another, especially if you have petabytes of information, could really quickly rack up some hidden costs. Watch for the hidden costs. Read your contracts. Talk to those people carefully. The third is the power of the service level agreement, or SLA. A lot of times you're going to be talking to people and they say, well, we've got 5.9 uptime. Well, what does 5.9 uptime mean to them? Does that mean, like I said earlier on, you get what you pay for? Do you have access 24/7 to a live human being on the other end? Do they have a disaster recovery service that's in place? Do we have the uptime that is measured not only by the company, because think about it. I could tell you that CBT Nuggets has 5.9 uptime, and then you go, well, how do you know that, Chris? Have you ever been over to their facilities? Have you ever talked to their IT persons? And I'd have to say honestly, well, I haven't had the opportunity at this point to go to the thing. Well, then you can say, well, how good is your estimate of 5.9 uptime? What you want to do is find companies like CBT Nuggets does, that comes in, does security audits, checks out, and says, yeah, these guys know what they're doing. Of course, your bigger companies, your Amazons, your Googles, and things like that, they've had independent audits, and you can check that out. But never underestimate the power of the service level agreement in what you have. Companies need to take control and make sure that their needs are being met. And part of the service level agreement, guess what, folks? I say you stick a management system in place so that way you can manage and monitor what's going on. The beauty of cloud computing is that you can go in and use the cloud technology at your disposal. You can go in there and check it anytime. And then finally, this kind of comes up with you get what you pay for, but budget ahead of schedule. Because one size does not fit all, gang. Sometimes you might think, well, we've got about 3 petabytes of data that we have total throughout our whole company. That's today. What about next year? When you sign contracts, sometimes they're going to give you maybe a pricing for what you have now. But then if you go ahead and prepay ahead of time, you could save hundreds of dollars, if not more, thousands of dollars, depending on the size of your company, if you budget ahead of schedule and say, well, our plan is to maybe add another 2 petabytes of information. Now, I'm just throwing numbers out here for you, but that gives you an idea. Budget ahead of schedule. Be proactive, not reactive. Reactive, gang, in this business costs you money. And I've saved the best for last, because the best thing is always going to be your people. the people that are actually going to utilize cloud computing. Now, of course, there are two groups that I usually break it down into. Your IT support group, which is going to be guys like you who are taking this on-the-job support series, and then, of course, end-user training, and those are everybody that also works with you that are going to be utilizing this. I mean, it's great that the IT support guys know all about Google Apps and how to access things, but if your end users don't know anything about it, you're going to spend most of your time getting the phone calls saying, James, I don't know exactly how this works. Can you help me? Can you help me log in? What's my password? We do that all the time anyway, don't we? So why make it harder for yourself? Think about the people when you are getting into cloud computing. First off, let's start with us, the IT network supports, the engineers, the desktop support team, everybody that you have that it's going to be helping out in the IT field. The first thing that you need to do is with IT support is make sure that your IT people, let's say over here's your IT people here, and so your IT people need to make sure that they know how to run whatever management and monitoring system that you have on this. For example, remember when we were looking at our Google apps, and I showed you how as Mr. CBT Nuggets was the admin, and how the admin, me or you, doing this is going to be setting up the password policies. You're going to be setting up who has access to what. You set up groups. You set up everything. Set that up in advance and make sure that all your IT folks know how to utilize that interface. Show them all the bells and whistles, the tools. Let them go ahead and take in some, Google offers some videos on their site that it gives a little bit more in-depth detail on, like setting up Postini and some of the pluses and minuses of that. Utilize it. Make sure your IT support staff know and understand the product that they're using in the cloud. Secondly, end user training. The applications. For example, we went ahead and gave you an end user training on Google Mail because Gmail is one of those things most people know, but there's so much to it that if they didn't know about all the bells and whistles that they're not really getting the biggest bang for their buck for all this cloud computing stuff you're doing. So you want to make sure that your end users over here, here's your end users, here's your IT support guys. Your end users also know how to utilize that application. It might be good for them to take a few minutes and to go through some of the training that we show here through CBT Nuggets on the cloud computing. Most of the things that I've demonstrated to you in this series, these nuggets, are really simple enough to grasp, and I think that most of them would be able to understand those. Use your discretion, but also, check out and see if there's anything else that is a little bit more application specific. Maybe take a day and say, hey, we're moving over into this new cloud computing environment. We're going to be using Salesforce training or something like that. Bring in somebody, buy some pizza, get in the conference room, throw it up onto the display on your laptop, and boom, off you go. And of course, probably one of the biggest ones we miss out on is policy education. If you have certain security policies, access policies, or even use policies in place, most businesses do, you want to make sure that your end users are aware of them. And in fact, it might be sometimes good to make it as part of the HR part of the world, is have them read through their electronic access thing and sign off saying, hey, I have agreed to this, I have looked at it, and that way you will be covered in case they say, well, I didn't know I couldn't access this through a public cafe Wi-Fi spot that's open to everybody that can see the data flowing into my computer, okay? Things like that. So make sure that your end users are trained up, ready to go to utilize the powerful forces that cloud computing can give to them. Probably the last thing that we want to talk about, but I'm sure most of you have sometimes on the mind all the time, especially if you're a catastrophic thinker like I am. What happens when things go wrong? Well, the best thing to do is to make sure that you have some sort of disaster recovery plan in place. You want to make sure that you know what happens when I can't get access to the information up here. What happens when, and maybe it's not even the cloud, maybe it's your network connection, and now you have no, access to that. Maybe one of your main applications that interfaces with the cloud goes down. What do we do with that? That moves, of course, into something that we've always done. What are the three things all IT managers need to know? Backup, backup, and more backup. So if you've decided to put your data in the cloud, you want to make sure you protect your applications. And so you want to make sure your apps and servers are ready. They have backups in place. They're ready to go. You want to make sure you know how your provider is protecting your data against a disaster. Do they have different sites? Do they mirror the locations? How that all works? And of course, you might just want to make sure that you have I know it sounds ancient, a tape backup or some sort of hard copy on another hard drives that you can take out and remove. You want to make sure you all have that. And ultimately, as part of that, you want to make sure that you have a plan. So whenever you get ready for this, whenever you're going to make that move into cloud computing, maybe some of you have already done it, and if you haven't made a plan for when things go wrong, do it today. As soon as you're done with this CBT nugget, I want you to write down a few things and then go to your IT manager, or if you're the IT manager, start going to your staff, come up with plans on how to deal when things go wrong. Again, cloud computing, I love it. I think it's a great solution for small to medium-sized businesses. I think it's going to save you money. I think it's definitely innovative, and it's going to make collaboration even better, and the future is going to revolve around this type of technology, but you have to play it safe. You have to be ready, and that's just a mantra that you need to repeat to yourself all the time. What happens when things go wrong? So, couple of warnings that we wanted to give to you for those who are considering going into the cloud computing environment. Why we made it the last CBT nugget? Well, we wanted to make sure you had all the good stuff and then just left you with just a few warnings before you jumped into that arena. In fact, many of you have probably already done so. Security. Remember, there's security in the cloud and then there's security at home. Make sure that the encryption levels are correct. Talk to the providers. Are your applications running your virtualization in a same environment as other people's applications? Who has access to that? Is it on the same machine? Those things are good to ask your provider. Costs. Always ask for a sheet for all costs and fees associated with what you're doing. Because, for example, if it's only costing you maybe about 8 cents a gigabyte to transfer up and down, well, wait a minute, is this going to be data that you're doing on a daily backup and you have access to? Well, they might charge you when you exceed a certain amount. It might go higher or it might go lower. You might even have where if you want to transfer from one organization to another and they'll allow you to do it, they might charge you outrageous rates. So you got to watch out for that. Then there's, of course, the people. Treat your people good, and they're going to do really well. Make sure you get some end user training put into place. All of you IT managers, if you have people working underneath you, make sure that you get them involved. Make sure they understand the interfaces and the administration and the maintenance that goes into these cloud applications. And then finally, make sure you've got your disaster recovery plan in place, in writing, ready to go, so that way you're not caught unawares when something goes wrong. I hope you enjoyed the training today, and I'd like to thank you for joining us.